All right. Welcome back to Simply Trade Tips with Hammer and Heels, otherwise known as Renee Chiuchiarelli and Julie Parks. Hey, Jules, how you doing today?
I'm good, Renee. How you doing?
Pretty good overall. For April, we're in April.
I know. Wow.
No, pretty soon we're going to be in back. It's going to be the end of 2026 before we know it, huh?
Yeah. Scary.
Okay, so here we are in Series 7. We're wrapping it up. This is our last episode in Series 7, episode 5. What are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, so I know that we've discussed value of strategic trade and things like that. I think that wrapping in other episodes, I think this one though, let's just focus on when you move from tactical to strategic and you're there, now let's talk about the value that brings in talking about a little bit about how we need to, I call it, remember if we, in the project management episode, we called it taking a lap. So this is a little bit more to remind you about how to take a lap and how to shift your management thinking from tactical reports to maybe more strategic metrics.
Awesome. Yeah. So basically, we're kind of saying here, look, strategy matters if leadership sees it. True leaders often do strategic work, but struggle to demonstrate its impact. I think that's absolutely true. You're running, executives typically see shipments moving, duties paid, compliance issues avoided, but they don't see the value that trade creates. And we know that. We know that for sure. So strategic trade must be visible, measurable, and tied to the business outcomes. So basically, how are we going to move from activity metrics to impact metrics? That's what Julie and I are. Activity metrics, and then we're going to describe them, impact metrics. So, and we talked in episode 1 when we defined of Series 7, episode 1, what is strategic work? What is tactile work? So as a recap, we have a few examples. Examples of activity metrics or tactile are entries filed, classifications completed, like you got 100 a week, training sessions delivered. Impact metrics are duty savings achieved, FTA utilization, error rate reductions, cycle time improvements, audit findings. And then, of course, this is a big one, reduction in manual work, right? I think that's what we want to show our leadership too, Joel. So anyway, those are just a recap of examples. But executives want to know what's changed because trade was involved. The switch from activity to impact metric is difficult. So how is this done, Jewel?
Yeah, so I think that we do a good job to count the number of entries that we filed, the duty that we've avoided, mitigated, or recovered. But have we put that on a list to kind of talk about your staffing, right? So, like, in a more strategic way to present this is trying to show that your staff level perhaps hasn't increased, and that maybe your volume has, your avoidance structure has, and probably the third component is the regs. The number of regs that we have to manage, new regs, has like quadrupled. So if your staff, you don't have like reg management and implementation of new regs, it is still manual, y'all. That is something that it's not quite yet fully automated. So I think if you were to speak to management, you might take the metric that is kind of the tactical metric of how many entries I've been doing, but you want to show it as a percent increase year over year, right? So, so to tell the story that our entries have increased 20% over the past 3 years, our count of trade programs has increased by 30%. The regs dropped on us have increased by 50%, and yet our staff has gone backward. So illustrating to management like you are going to have errors is a different way. That's the more strategic way to kind of present that.
Yeah.
So I think the other thing too is that the how, like how do you move in this direction, right? So some of these things you do need to get a small team together to discuss. Okay, guys, we know that we have these tactical metrics, but we want to show our value. What really shows our value, and really maybe send it to your council. We talked about this a few episodes back about org structure and creating a council. Send it to the council as an objective. Have them come back with what's meaningful, right?
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. Next, you could also, we want to make sure that the outcome fits on one slide. We know leadership is busy. I mean, they have a lot less time to digest information, so we need to simplify it. Sometimes we used to call it make it on one slide with 4 quadrants and make it simple and
Yeah.
clear, right?
Yeah, and then too, like when you're thinking about those quadrants, let's say one quadrant is effective duty rate. What's your target or your goal line? So that leadership can easily see visually, even though those quadrants are kind of small. If you're going to show like the strategic metric for effective duty rate, how are you falling better than you expected, worse than you expected? And again, those goal lines can be adjusted over time, especially like of course with the increase of tariffs over time, but even showing that metric globally is an important piece. So
Yeah.
keep that goal line in mind, y'all.
Yeah, keep that. Yeah, you need to the the money shot. Target. Yeah, and then the other thing is sometimes if you're new to introducing impact metrics, you want to explain the first time how you calculated these. Maybe you put it in. Julie and I used to have slide decks, and then we'd have backup data. And then we would say, hey, we have the backup data. Maybe the first time you're showing the backup data and the calculations, just to make it clear. Obviously, you're not going to repeat that month over month, but
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that where each chart should have a bottom line. So like color coding that shows status, right? So it's not enough just to show the goal line. Are you green? Like is a good example of like
yeah.
what are in order. Yellow might be more concerning. Red is, like we need to throw some resources at it. But the other thing to kind of think about when you're moving from tactical, like I'm going to give you an example. There was a strategic metric that our group had thought about. It's like a return from the government, like questions from the government kind of a piece. And when you really peeled that back and you looked at the backup, it really wasn't telling the story to leadership that the data was telling. So I just want to underscore what Renee said about when we did these metrics, we had a backup slide that absolutely said how it was calculated because then you found, oh, this was kind of a false, we thought the government thought we were great, but we weren't measuring the right thing because
Mhm.
wired over here. So just to kind of that keeps everybody in check, right? This is what we're measuring. Because sometimes, by the way, some of these complex metrics you don't have the data for. So maybe it's a two-put process where I'm going to measure this today and I'm going to measure that later tomorrow. So I think that you just need to deliver your first round of iterations, and then maybe your backup slide says our next iteration is this. Once this happens, this automation happens or something. So just keep that in mind that these can iterate in a fashion. But the most important thing is that you tell people what you're specifically measuring and don't just give them a chart.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
And then we're gonna connect to the financial outcomes?
Yes, I think here that strategic work does affect the bottom line. So think about when you're presenting your things. How has tariff engineering decisions or sourcing
Mhm.
strategy changed? How has utilization of FTAs lowered actual landed costs? Right. So that requires a little bit of a partnership with the buying group. But these more complex metrics are really important. I mean, proactive classification, avoiding future liabilities, right? So you performed a classification review and you modified a few points in your database and you got in front of that. Maybe you did prior disclosures on that, so that the government wouldn't come knocking. So trade does
Yes.
become a financial lever, not just a regulatory requirement. And sharing this data, even if only once per year in this fashion, because y'all, it takes a hot minute to put together. It is important to shift the mindset of leadership towards the strategic value of the function, because just knowing how many entries were cleared and how much it costs to do that isn't telling the full story.
Yes.
Mhm,
Thank you, Joel.
mhm.
And we know a lot of trade teams do strategic work, what we would call quietly, meaning it's not seen because it's not on the reports, it's not in
Right.
the metric, it's not
Mhm.
considered value add, right? It's just they're like we said through the episode, you're just showing the number of entries you cleared. So visibility matters. That's the running theme here. And we used to do quarterly reviews.
Mhm.
We would bring our whole team. We would invite other people. So that's an option too. Is making having and Julie said this in the beginning, having like a celebration lap, taking a lap. a quarterly review is not just taking a lap, but it does
Mhm.
include that sometimes.
It does. And it was important, I
So
think, for morale too, Renee, right?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and we used to spend what? Sometimes 2 couple hours,
We
you
would
know?
every quarter, and the other part that Renee and I just can't say enough is if you don't do these, you are for sure not spreading your strategic value to other leaders in the organization. So think about, I mean, the ops review might be for your team, but maybe you're taking an excerpt of that to your leadership meeting and line them up so you're not redoing work. And by the way, you don't want to start with the leadership presentation before you do your ops review with your people. You have to
Yeah.
start with there's an order of how you make these strategic, how you make these slides strategic and the communications strategic.
Yeah, those were awesome. Okay, and the other ways you could do it was, well, we talked about quarterly ops review, but you could have quarterly trade program updates, um, dashboard showing key trade metrics where your leadership has visibility to, executive briefings on regulatory changes. Obviously, we've talked ad nauseum about bringing trade up to the cradle
Mhm,
front of the supply chain. So
mhm.
you participate in sourcing and supply chain strategy discussion. That's a way to show your value in the trade space.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, those are
Yeah.
some other options.
Yeah, and then maybe something else you can think about as you're putting together those presentations is what are the things that you're doing that position your group as a strategic partner, right? So, as Renee mentioned, like the things that are moving upstream. So, how are you influencing product design decisions, sourcing strategies, supply chain restructuring, market expansion planning, tariff response strategies, right? You're trying to shift trade from a gatekeeper to be a strategic advisor. So you need to highlight for the leadership how you're doing that.
Love that. Julie,
Mhm.
gatekeeper to strategic
Right,
advisor.
right.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
I wanna throw one other thing, and I forgot earlier about our quarterly ops review. We have programs, which for us were kinda like contracts,
Mhm,
and we would talk about the wins that, some of these Julie and I used to call these things unicorns, obviously. We
mhm.
had a lot of unicorns,
We do.
and
Mm,
they were difficult, and we had to bring in quite a few people on the team and multiple departments within our team, and let's say we made it, we got the job done. We would show pictures and images, and we would spend some time talking about who did what, and, we would even give we talked about this in previous episodes, our stars, rewards. Hey, if somebody did something really awesome, we a reward through the system. So that's another way to bring,
mhm.
we talked about this in episode 4, delegating and bringing wins to your employees a little bit.
Right, but really showing your strategic value, you got the program's question answered, in partnership with them, so you truly are that's a great way to highlight how you become a strategic partner, I like that.
Strategy.
Mhm,
Yeah. Okay. So strategic leaders, we'll back into a little bit of leadership. They ask different questions. So if you are a strategic leader, you're like, how does this decision affect our landed cost?
mhm.
Not how much is the cost, how much is it?
Right.
Can we structure the supply chain differently? So you're thinking about the big picture, right? Where is the next compliance or cost risk?
Mhm.
So the focus moves from transactional accuracy to strategic foresight. And I think we're demonstrating that.
Right, right.
So what do you think our FIO should be, Jules?
So, given that we're trying to like shift the communication from tactical to strategic, also, I think that what you want to do is think about one thing that executives are caring about right now. Are they caring about cost savings, avoidance, risk reduction? Pick one and just start reporting on it more consistently. Is it in a newsletter? Is it in a trade brief? Is it what becomes your method? But just pick one and start reporting on it more consistently. Put a note on your calendar every couple months that you have to prep this communication and start. And I promise you, you start seeing the recipients of the message start seeing you in a different light as a strategic leader, not a tactical leader. So that's one benefit. But the other benefit is that I can't tell you how much the trade professionals in your organization will recognize that I feel seen. I feel
Mhm.
validated. I feel like, oh my gosh, our message is getting out there because it wasn't before. So I think that's great. So when leadership sees the numbers, trade stops being viewed as overhead and starts being viewed as value creation. So,
Yeah.
so show the value creation. Right?
That's awesome. All right, great. I love that FIO. All right, have a great week, you guys. Thanks for listening. Get to our community trade geeks. Thanks, Julie. See you
Oh,
next
thanks,
time.
Renee.